ki jai.
Yeah,
Are you able to see my screen?
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Then we'll start with how to love God. Jai Baba.
Okay, Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. How to love God. To love God in the most practical way is to love our fellow beings. If we feel for others in the same way as we feel for our own dear ones, we love God. If instead of seeing faults in others, we look within ourselves, we are loving God. If instead of robbing others to help ourselves, we rob ourselves to help others, we are loving God. If we suffer in the suffering of others and feel happy in the happiness of others, we are loving God. If instead of worrying over our own misfortunes, we think of ourselves more fortunate than many, many others, we are loving God. If we endure our lot with patience and contentment, accepting it as His will, we are loving God. If we understand and feel that the greatest act of devotion and worship to God is not to hurt or harm any of His beings, we are loving God. To love God as He ought to be loved, we must live for God and die for God, knowing that the goal of all life is to love God and find Him as our own self. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Thank you. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. So we continue our journey into book 3, and we noticed that the first few stanzas in book 3 are about the journey of the soul. So it starts like does God speaks with the beyond state, and goes into the planes. I think we were at the planes in the fourth plane. I think when we ended yesterday. So he rests and enjoys. Maybe we'll read the last para and continue from there. Tar Meher Baba ki jai. Uh, Page is physical page is 70. Here he rests and enjoys the perfumes of paradise until the master, watchful and benign, urges him gently on, and he mounts to the second shining circle and enjoys heavenly music. And again the master urges on, and he arrives at the third circle of infinite light. Now, if the gentle Murshid urges on again, halfway across the wide plain of that plain lies enchantment. But if he holds steadily to the master's name and vision of his lovely face, he passes the danger and arrives at the fourth circle of this way. Practical question. So, enchantment, like I said yesterday, is the Sufi term Hayrat. Murshid is perfect master or leader from a Sufi standpoint. Which is the most dangerous plane, according to what we've learned? The plane that can cause retro action, or we come back from that plane, whereas all the other planes you're continuing your upward journey.
That is fourth. But here it
So
looks
if let
like third.
like third, exactly. So that was my doubt, but I don't know what to make of that. But why not mark it out? Let's see
Yes.
what comes out of asking that question, right? So I think maybe the Hayrat part is third. I'm not very sure. The specification of Hayrat. Hayrat is this enchantment that he's talking about here. Maybe that's a third plane phenomenon, or maybe that's a phenomenon in multiple planes. But specifically, the danger, or the biggest, the most dangerous plane seems to be fourth, as we have learned. We'll see. We'll find out. If I find something, I will share it with the group anyway. Let's continue. Here, the powers which tempted Buddha and Jesus in the wilderness are ranged against him. Nor God nor any man, save God as fully manifest as a man, perfect in love and power, can help him. Only by the perfect Master's perfect mercy can these powers be held in check, and the fifth glorious circle won, or turned and directed towards universal good, thus bringing him straightway to the sixth circle where he sees God, his own very self, face to face continuously. So I think this fixes it. We don't even have to mark this out because he goes on to say, right? So we'll just clean it up. Oh,
Delete.
yeah,
Once again.
yeah, because I did it twice. Yes. Yeah, so here the powers which tempted Buddha and Jesus in the wilderness are ranged against him. Now he's talking fourth plane. Save God as fully manifest as a man, perfect in love and power. He's talking about God man, can help him, or only by the perfect master's perfect mercy can these powers be held in check. So the fourth plane is clearly brought out as we have understood it, which is the dangers can be saved either by the God man's push or the man God's push, right? And then through that, you get the fifth glorious circle and directed towards universal good. And then he sees God face to face everywhere continuously. That's the sixth plane, right?
I think we need to look back on third plane. What are the characteristics? We might have missed a few points there earlier when we read God Speaks, I think. What he
So I
refers
think
to,
it's a good idea. I mean, it's a good refresher that would help us. But I think here it's well summarized. The first is
yes,
the experiences. The second is the music, which is also there in Godspeak, and then the third is where is the he gets the Hairat, right? So we'll refresh that. By the way, I was just thinking about it yesterday. Obviously, when a larger group is there, we can talk. But after Stay with God, I'm guessing we go back to God Speaks
yes,
because it's been a long time and I want to go back and read it again, right? So let's do God Speaks in detail after this. And we will actually do something different. So we will rotate the reading between the people. So they have
yes.
to read and explain. So we'll make it I'm trying to increase participation here, but all that subject to how many people we have in the next few weeks. So we'll see. Anyway,
Yes.
so let me continue. But now that Kama is in our time zone, maybe he's going to influence more people to come. We'll find out. Anyway, now begins the game of love in earnest, to which the flight of nights of earth, moon, and thundering wave on white beach, and stars of eyes and honeyed mouth, and delicate wisp of hair in sudden breeze, was apprenticeship to forgetfulness and service. This is the love which only the verses of God Himself or His perfect saints can hint us towards. Deafness and sightlessness and the wasted frame and tears. God as a man worshipping God as God, and God as God loving Himself in a man. And so, till He tears the final veil between Him and Himself and answers His question, who am I? With I am myself. So he brings back the concepts that he has brought out till now in the seventh plane. through the white beach and the stars of the eyes, and remember the honeyed mouth. And then he says the delicate wisp of hair in sudden breeze was nothing but apprenticeship as in discipleship to forgetfulness and service. And I think forgetfulness is in the broad meaning of forgetfulness of our mind, forgetfulness of the the nothingness that we get absorbed in and get to the reality. So I think that's the allusion here. This is the love which only the verses of God Himself or His perfect saints can hint us towards. Deafness and sightlessness and the wasted frame and tears. God as a man worshipping God as God, and God as God loving Himself in a man. Beautiful lines. God as a man worshipping God as God, which Baba has done, and God as God loving Himself in a man by loving all of us. And so, till He tears the final veil between Him and Himself and answers His question, who am I? With the answer, I am myself. So that's what is being conveyed here. So, with that, we come to the end of the first part within the book, within the first God Speaks. Within the third book, which we are
Third book,
reading right now.
third.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's continue. Now, if I remember correctly, like in God Speaks, there are three pass. If you remember, there are three passes of the divine theme that God Speaks goes over. Right? It brings up the theme in chapter 1, and then the third time he does it is in part 2, which is Erit's words in the 10 states of God. So the divine theme is processed or presented thrice. I think even here there are multiple presentations of the divine theme. We have just seen one go through, starting from the beyond and ending with seventh plane. So let's read the second part and find out for ourselves. Once God slept, and there surged within him the urge, the whim to know himself. And he asked himself, who am I? And he was objectified to himself as opposite to him, experiencing contrariety and so disrupting his indivisible poise and eternal tranquility, and causing in him experience of impression, which was gross, solid, himself as separate from him, finite as opposite to infinite. He became conscious by impression not of himself as eternal, infinite self, but of finiteness, which in turn necessitated form, seed of contrariety sown by the reverberation of the first urge. So the reference here is to, I think even when I heard the video, I remember Ward talking about the use itself of the word contrariety, which is not a very common, which is not a common word. So what he's saying here is the aspect of opposites. The aspect of contra is uh, contrast and and so on and so forth. So contrariety is the noun form of that differentiation. Contrasting is differentiation or opposites and so on and so forth. So he's bringing out that aspect here, and I think he's used the word twice here. So beautiful lines again.
Last
Yeah.
line is
Any?
very nice. Last line is very, say, impressive. Seed of contrariety
Yes.
sown.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Suddenly, it says, seed of contrariety sown by the reverberations of the first urge. Yes. Nice
Yeah.
expression.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So I think he says that there's one reference to the word contrariety here. There it is on page 6. Because of this most gross first impression of the first urge, the infinite soul experienced for the first time. The first experience of this infinite soul was that it, the soul, experienced a contrariety in its identity with its infinite, impressionless, unconscious state. This is exactly what he's saying in those poetic lines.
Yes.
This experience of contrariety affected changeableness in the eternal, indivisible stability of the infinite soul, and spontaneously there occurred a sort of eruption, disrupting the indivisible poise and the unconscious tranquility of the infinite soul with a recoil or tremendous shock which impregnated the unconsciousness of the unconscious soul with first consciousness of its apparent separateness from the indivisible state of Paramatma. And he goes on. The second reference, we can quickly see if we find it, or let's see it later. Yeah, here it is. 6 references to Hierarch. This is in the supplement. Hierarch Enchantment. 3 of 6, 4 of 6, 5 of 6. Okay, so it's all in the index only. Okay, so any on the third plane, if we do a refresh, please share where and how you do the refresh. We can read about it and share on the group. Yeah, so by the way, on that note, I hope I started back the pearls. So is it worth doing? People enjoying the audios again?
Yes, yes. Daily once
Yeah,
we
so in
can.
fact, yeah, so I'm also going to start doing that with the Bangalore group and maybe some other groups. So on WhatsApp for kicks, given I'm reasonably active these days in WhatsApp. All right, so let's get back here. Yeah, next line. And he built for himself a house of stone, not of stone walls, but solid stone, and sat down in it. And because of the closeness of stone, thought and sat. I'll read again. And he built for himself a house of stone, not of stone walls, but solid stone, and sat down in it. And because of the closeness of stone thought, though without act of thinking, he was stone. He, the eternally free and only existent one, thought he was stone. But after ages and cycles of this imprisonment, the heat of his desire for self knowing melted the stone, and he was freed from imprisonment in stone, but retained the impressions of stoneness, and with these impressions of most solidness, built for himself a more commodious whole house in which to experience solidness with greater freedom. Simple but flowery language which explains the move from stone to the next form, and also the creation of the stone form itself. And there are a lot of subtle things which we have to watch out, right? So he says, though without act of thinking, the consciousness is so faint here that the act of thinking may not be actually possible in the stone form. But there is impressions being created, and that's the point that's being made, right? He and
Yes.
and then he talks about the word of imprisonment, right? So imprisonment in stone, and then going to a more commodious house. Now, what he says is a better form, a more commodious. Let's check the meaning of that word. I would presume it
Accommodates.
is some, yeah, accommodates the greater requirements, right? Right. Commodious, roomy and comfortable, more commodious dwelling, right? So on those lines, more comfortable. Yeah. So to experience solidness with greater freedom. This house was iron, and because of its closeness, identified himself with iron and sat in iron, sitting for ages and cycles. though not so long, since iron melts quicker than stone, and this house too dissolved away, and using as materials the impressions impressioned in consciousness, he built his next house of thick vegetation of mosses and grass, and twining creepers and trees growing thickly. But these, though green with sap, burned quickly, and his consciousness was free of entanglement of dreaming vegetation. Again, very, very beautiful. Each of the words are uh, poetically so beautifully chosen here that it's nice, right? So he says of vegetation. So he's also making the point that in each of these kingdoms, you spend lesser time, and that's a reference to sharper consciousness and the evolution picking up speed, right? So what took millions of years in the stone form takes a few lesser in the metal form and much lesser in vegetation. Again, this is all scale, right? It's still hundreds of thousands of years, right? But this is a nice point, right? Though green with sap. So green doesn't burn well, but he says, though green with sap, burned quickly, and his consciousness was free of entanglement of dreaming vegetation. So he's also making the point that it's only a dream. The dream of vegetation is freed and burned, and he was freed of that and go freed of that, again, nice word, entanglement, right? And he opened his eyes to surrounding flesh. So from vegetation, the first reference of flesh. And he opened his eyes to surrounding flesh, worm flesh, and fish flesh, and bird flesh, and beast flesh, and last, man flesh. And man flesh was thin flesh and consumed easily in the fire, but desirable above all other forms of flesh. And so, each time the fire, now identified as love, burned down one house, he quickly built another for his man experiencing, so sweet with joy and pain. Man house and woman house, house well built and strong, jerry built, designed in beauty or ugliness. He, the householder, loved, unloved, progressing, standing still, or falling back in the process of I. So if you notice, it's again beautiful concepts that are brought out. He's bringing out the concept of the ego. He's bringing out the concept of the opposites. So he brings out,
I think
though he gets,
you need to read it once again, bit slow.
sure. And he opened his eyes to surrounding flesh, worm flesh, and fish flesh, and bird flesh, and beast flesh, and last, man flesh. And man flesh was thin flesh and consumed easily in the fire, but desirable above all other forms of flesh. And so, each time the fire, now identified as love, burned down one house, he quickly built another for his man experiencing, so sweet with joy and pain, man house and woman house, house well built and strong, jerry built, designed in beauty or ugliness. He, the householder, loved, unloved, progressing, standing still, or falling back in the press of I. So let's just focus on the man part, right? So he actually rapidly covers quite a lot of ground here. So, and man flesh was thin flesh and consumed easily in the fire. So again, the point of lessening number of time that you need from one birth to another, one form to another. And obviously, he also says birth to birth. I'll come to that in a minute. But then he makes the point, but it's desirable above all other forms of flesh. So he's making the point that it is the pinnacle from a form standpoint. And he says, and so each time the fire, now he uses the analogy that each of these kingdoms are burned down. The houses that he builds are burned down, and he builds another commodious house. Now, here he says, now this fire is identified as love. So he's equating the driving force for all of this as being love. Burned down one house, he quickly built another for his man experiencing. Now it is reincarnation. So one house he got burnt by love, he's building another one quickly. So sweet with joy and pain. So the opposites are being experienced here. And the second important aspect of reincarnation is also brought out. Man house and woman house. So you take forms in both genders. The house is well built and strong. Jerry built, he says. I do not know what that reference is, but designed in beauty or ugliness. So your form could be beautiful, it could be ugly. He, the householder, now he is the drop soul here, the person inside the house, the small self. He, the householder, loved or unloved. So he could have got the grace and love from the perfect master and God, or not. Progressing, that is, he's making involution, or standing still. He could just be holding on to the sanskaras, or worse, falling back in the press of I. The ego mind is in control of you, and then you're basically falling back. You're not making any progress, in fact, going back. So a lot of ground covered here in this beautiful paragraph. Right? Loving his loves and suffering his loves. Breaking down, which is nothing but death, and building up again, birth, innumerable houses for his requirement of innumerable experience. And between each, casting off, accompanied by groans and sweats and hopes from priest, and fears from prospect, clinging back and sundering on, and new assuming through mother pains and blood, and hopes and anguish, neglected or comforted, heaven or hell, according to deeds, desires, and accomplishments. So the reincarnations continue. Loving his loves and suffering his loves, breaking down, equivalent of death, and building up again, birth, innumerable houses for his requirement of innumerable experience. The objective of all of this is to have innumerable experiences, and for each of those innumerable experiences, you need innumerable houses. And he uses another beautiful word, casting off. So the form is cast off. And between each casting off, which is accompanied by groans and sweats and hopes from priest, he introduces a priest now, and fears from prospect, clinging back and sundering on, and new assuming through mother pains and blood, and hopes and anguish neglected or comforted, heaven or hell according to deeds, desires, and accomplishments. So he also brings the concept that in between these reincarnations, there is the concept of the mother and the pains connected to rebirth. And with that comes hopes or anguish, and either you're neglected or you're comforted. And between all this, he also introduces the concept of heaven or hell state, and which is determined by the deeds, desires, and accomplishments. Any thoughts, any questions?
No, he brings all of them together in his own poetic way. Nice. And makes us think on each line and word to get some meaning out of it.
And quite honestly, I think this will be very tough for somebody who does not know discourses, God speaks, Baba,
Yes,
and
yes,
the
yes, yes, yes.
overall knowledge. This will just be very difficult, and that explains why I gave up on it so easily earlier, because nothing made sense. Right. So, hi Ravi, how are you? Jai Baba.
Hello, Jay Baba. Good,
Let's.
good,
Oh,
good, good.
So
I
that,
stopped halfway through a stanza. Yeah, go ahead,
yes,
Mama.
yes. There are two other lines attached to this.
I realized too. Yeah. So let me just finish that first. Where he sorted out. So that's the hell and heaven. So and hopes and anguish, neglected or comforted, heaven or hell, according to deeds, desires, and accomplishments, where he sorted out, discarded, or accepted values of human beingness, paid pains for sin, delights for virtue. So he's explaining heaven or hell state. So he's sorting out his issues and sorting out the status. The accounting is happening in the heaven or hell. He either discards or accepts values of human beingness, he says. And then he paid the pains for sin. So he pays for sin through pain, and he enjoys some delights for virtue. So sin and virtue are paid back in either pain or delight, never arriving at that hidden equipoise, which, if got, would finish the infernal seesaw of up good, down bad, and back where you came from to another body, because that's what you want, although really you don't. Equipoise, balance, the calm and patient sweat of adepts on the path to truth. What chance a bloke got without a body attached to solid earth, or some fixed luminous star to hold to, trying to juggle the scales of relative value, trying to assess the inertia of the pendulum and hold it midway. 6 o'clock exact. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful para. So he's talking about equipoise, the balancing of the sanskaras, and the need for an adept on the path or a luminous star to hold on to. Lot being said, right? So never arriving at that hidden equipoise, which, if got, would finish the infernal seesaw of up good, down bad. So he's saying the sanskaras and the journey of reincarnations is nothing but a seesaw, an infernal seesaw. And then he uses some old English. So here is you, and back where you came from to another body, because that's what you want. I'm just replacing it. Although really you don't. So you just want to get back to another body, but actually you don't want it, because your true nature is not about that. Equipoise, balance, the calm and patient sweat of adepts on the path to truth. Patient sweat of adepts. Beautiful wordings again, right? So they put a lot of effort, the adepts, those on the path. But key attribute is patience along with it. So patient sweat of adepts on the path to truth. What chance a bloke got without a body attached to solid earth? Now he's again, I think, making a reference to the need of the small cell to be in a human form to make this progress. So there's no chance if you don't have a body on our earth, which is the only place where this progress can be done, and you should have a human body. And he says, or some fixed luminous star to hold to, trying to juggle the scales of relative value. The beautiful expression from discourses. Values and relative values, apparent values and false values. We know all the beautiful meanings and importance and significance of those statements, right? the scales of relative value, trying to assess the inertia of the pendulum and hold it midway 6 o'clock exact. So the time is 6 o'clock, which is the straight line. Yeah, go ahead.
We miss Ashok because he would have came
exactly what I was thinking.
The other book which we were reading relates to so many things from this stanza. So the pendulum, the seesaw movement, and then the equipoise, all these things are very, very expressive.
And he would have loved the balancing of the karma, balancing of the sanskaras.
Yes.
He would have again jumped up and liked the fact of equating from an accounting standpoint. I was reminded of that.
Yes.
So, yeah, any others? Silence, Kama, Sanjay, Ravi. Silence continues, and I continue. But as the earth nights of moon and stars of ice and cool breeze over the still warm sands, curling a wisp of hair across her brow, which nourished his vision, and the roar of the surf of earth shaker Poseidon, pointing his pulse of life force, to more than himself, to distance, was apprenticeship to forgetfulness and service, by which he would become, oh, in what ages and cycles to come, a lover of God. So all this fumbling with scales betwixt breaking up and again building of innumerable houses was cooling for the day when would be revealed to him the eternal values of truth. Lot being said, he goes back to the analogy of the lady and the wisp of hair, curling a wisp of hair and the sands. And he brings the Greek god Poseidon. Poseidon is again the Greek god of the oceans. So he says, Earth shaker Poseidon. He shakes the earth with his oceanic power, pointing his pulse of life force, to more than himself. So he points the pulse of life force. Go ahead. Saying something?
That impulse word, he has given a new meaning. Pulse of life force.
Yeah. Impulse, pulse of life force, to more than himself. So Poseidon is pointing his impulse to more than himself. To distance was apprenticeship to forgetfulness and service. If you remember 2 stanzas above, he said apprenticeship to forgetfulness and service as a virtue or as an attribute of somebody who's on the path. And we even noticed that. By which he would become, oh, in what ages and cycles to come, a lover of God. So he would become a lover of God himself. So all this fumbling with scales betwixt breaking up and again building up of innumerable houses was cooling for the day when he would be revealed to him eternal values of truth. When would be revealed to him eternal values of truth? So all this reincarnation is nothing, and all this fumbling with scales betwixt breaking up. So when he's breaking up these houses, he's fumbling.
Last two lines give a very nice imagery of a child playing with, say, sticking blocks, creating a house, and then dismantling, recreating a house, things like that. So our birth and death is something like that. It's a schooling process.
You're not only poetic, you're very artistic. Now there's this kid with the blocks. Nice.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, and that goes well with what he uses as the word schooling as well, right? So it's
Yes,
basically
yes.
all of this fumbling with the scales and breaking and making again is for schooling. And what is that schooling
Schooling.
for? It is for that day when would be revealed the eternal values of truth. So he comes back with
Yes.
our beautiful keyword values and then comes to eternal values of truth. Going and coming, demolishing with fire one house and building another with bricks of impressions baked in the fire, till he takes his stand in the flood and turns the waters to control the fire, or grasps fire in two hands wet, with weeping and worshipping its glowing countenance, moves it to burn the rubbish in the house, or seeks the master bright beyond fire's brightness, moist eyed with floods of beneficence and mercy, and offers him the sin of vice and virtue of householding, offers him his bricks of himself to be pounded back into clay for remodeling. Beautiful. So he talks, I think, if you look at that oceanic and Poseidon and that sand example, he talks of the flood and how he stands against the flood. This is the second time we are seeing that reference, right? So, and he's also brought up this concept of the fire being equal to love, and fire is what is running this whole thing and bringing down each house one at a time. So let's read this again and see if it makes more sense. He's basically talking about how the master helps and makes him realize the true values. Continuing on the back of what we learned in the previous stanza. Going and coming, demolishing with fire one house and building another with bricks of impressions baked in the fire, till he takes his stand in the flood. So he takes his stand in the flood, in the ocean, and turns the waters to control the fire, or grasps fire in two hands wet, with weeping and worshipping its glowing countenance, moves it to burn the rubbish in the house, or seeks the master bright beyond fire's brightness, moist eyed with floods of beneficence and mercy, and offers him the sin of vice and virtue of householding, offers him his bricks of himself to be pounded back into clay for remodeling. So, in the end, you offer yourself and the bricks that you have to be pounded back into clay for remodeling, reminding us of the other analogy, the biblical analogy of the potter, the clay with the potter, the miller who was John. It's all about going back to dust, wheat getting pounded to dust, only to be seeded and grow back into wheatgrass, right? So,
There
all
is
of
a few points here.
sure, go ahead.
Weeping and worshipping, and beneficence and mercy of the master. And in the beginning, it is building another with bricks of impression done by himself, isn't it? Whereas in
Yeah,
the
correct,
end, he says himself to be pounded back into clay for remodeling by somebody, that is the master.
correct. That's
So
the
it is
last.
very well built up here. So
Yes.
we have
So
to
you
give
keep
up. Yes.
correct, correct, correct. Very good point. So many times, the many births that you take in reincarnation and involution are you doing the bricks and the fire and
Yes,
the
yes.
burning.
Ah,
It's your effort. And towards the end, obviously, you need the help of the master who pounds it back into clay for remodeling. right?
Yes.
Any other points from anybody else? Any other thoughts? Any other ways of understanding this? No. So let's continue. Takes his stand and stops playing the role. Stops walking about the house admiring it, picking up knickknacks from the shelves, dusting and stroking and acknowledging them as worth and placing them back in just right places. Looking out from sitting room windows at the view and garden, thinking, a shrub there, some sow, and sow flowers there. I, the householder, turning back into the room, considering his face, a few gray hairs, figure a bit too much in the mirrors, and turns on himself coldly or savagely, and deliberately opens the door and leaves it to whomso to loot and enjoy. So, house analogy gets a little more interesting. So, if you are the householder and you are in the house, these are the normal things that you do in the process of dealing with your sanskaras. You walk about the house, admiring it, picking up knickknacks from the shelves, dusting and stroking and acknowledging them. So you give in to those sanskaras. You dust them, stroke them, build upon them, and nice word, acknowledging them as worth, though they are worthless, and placing them back in just right places and put them back wherever they belong. Looking out from the sitting room windows at the view and garden, this is the householder, thinking, a shrub there, some sow, and sow flowers there. So he's thinking of what to do in the garden. I, the householder, turning back into the room, considering his face, a few gray hairs, figure a bit too much in the mirrors, and turns on himself coldly or savagely, and deliberately opens the door and leaves it to whomso to loot and enjoy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to understand the second part. Anybody?
No, how we give up this gross thing. Say, one is he looks back on the house himself in different ways and then looks out to the flowers, shrub, and other things. So he is going beyond the gross body as such. And then later
Okay.
on, as he progresses in age and experience and all that, or his journey in the path, he deliberately opens the door and leaves it to whomsoever to loot and enjoy. He just leaves this gross plane. It can be taken like that.
Yes,
So he
yes.
doesn't give any importance to this gross body as such.
Correct, correct. Basically,
Beautiful. So
through the arduous journey, he gets frustrated with the house that he holds, and actually ultimately he opens it up.
Yes.
Yeah, a bit too much. Yeah,
yeah, and then he gives up on that house and lets it to anybody to loot and enjoy. So it becomes worthless, and
Yes.
he recognizes the true value of that. Yeah, beautiful. I think I like that. I mean, that is the interpretation. Um, let's continue. But whatever comes at last, the ripening through loves and unloves, swift joys and slow pain, sure grasp and shaking hand, ripen to indifference and alertness, and he takes his stand in the current of comings and goings. And next time he comes with transparent residual impressions for building material and builds him his next last house, through which from outside light shines, and he loses himself in dreaming light and goes in light and weighs light and returns with materials of light and builds a house of light and meditates light, becomes light, and never again returns. So, this is
Yes.
a reference to the last time somebody makes this trip to build a house.
Yes.
So, see it as the context of the small self reaching the state of God realization and hence not having to come back to the cycle. With that in mind, let's read it again and it'll make more sense. But whatever comes at last, the ripening through loves and unloves, swift joys and slow pain, sure grasp and shaking hand, strength and weakness, sure grasp and shaking hand, ripened to indifference and alertness. There's a greater attempt at equipoise. He's indifferent and alert. He's smarter to know both of those. And he takes his stand in the current of comings and goings. And next time he comes with transparent residual impressions. So it's just the last few residual impressions for building material and builds him his next last house through which from outside light shines. And so here there's a higher chance of grace, which is what is probably symbolized by the light. And he loses himself in that dreaming light and goes in light and weighs light. So now he's bringing the other meaning of light. So goes in light because he is not weighed down, weighs light and returns with materials of light, now the big L, and builds a house of light, which is Godhood, and meditates light, becomes light, and never again returns. Beautiful, beautiful words.
Yes. So it is a house building. So taken to the
Analogy.
logical end of light.
Yeah. So that's, I think, the second part. Another stanza comes to an end. Another part comes to an end. And in this part, we saw the house example. We saw Poseidon come back. We saw what he experiences in reincarnation. We didn't go to the plains this time. We just saw the milling of the grinding of the wheat in the reincarnation, and then we draw it to a close. Right. So with that, let's continue to the next one. Again, I think it's the third pass. So the first pass was the first part. Second part was again starting with the sleeping of God, which is the beyond beyond. So the third part again starts with the same state of God. Right. Any questions or insights before we go to the next one? Next part.
No, I think this gives a clue that we may have to try to compare it with how God speaks develops. So the same theme is presented 3 or 4 times in God speaks in different chapters, and it is elaborated in the, I think, chapter 8. So that is the, say, the 10 states of God. So maybe he is developing on the same lines, or is there any difference? We'll have to think of this. Because he is also following some similarity here. He is taking 3 times the same, or maybe another time he takes it in this book 3, I think. Okay.
Yeah, we don't know, but I think that's a very good point. When we read God Speaks again, yes, let's focus on what are the differences in those 3 passes and see if there is a parallel, if any, between what Francis is doing here and what Baba does in God Speaks. Yes. That point. Okay, and I start this next part. Once God slept and awoke and journeyed in immense journey through stone and metal and green of earth and worm and fish and bird and animal and assumed man shape. And as man loved his loves and suffered his loves and died to his loves and was born to them again and again, repeating each time the folly of I and you, yours and mine, linking securely the links of the evil chain. A man, sunlight of eyes and pastures of sweet lips, dark night and the cruel wave curling beneath. The road, the road, himself the road, love and the grace of the Master. So it's it's again an attempt to start from beyond beyond. So he awoke and journeyed in immense journey. So there's a lot of journey that is covered by this God who was once sleeping through stone and metal and green of earth and worm and fish and bird and animal and assumed man shape. And as man loved his loves and suffered his loves and died to his loves and was born to them again and again. So, and as man loved his loves, suffered his loves, and died to his loves, and was born to them again and again, repeating each time the folly of I and you. The separative existence that Baba says was the folly, repeating each time the folly of I and you, yours and mine, linking securely the links of the evil chain. So remember the fetters. Discourses uses the word fetters for chain. So each time you have this I and you recognize and acknowledge the separative existence, you are securing the chain. And he calls this the evil chain. A man, sunlight of eyes and pastures of sweet lips, dark night and the cruel wave curling beneath. The road, himself the road, love and the grace of the Master. So the only path is the love and the grace of the Master that can get you out of this dark night and move towards recognition of your true nature, right? That's what I make of the last few lines. He loves the biblical concept of the dark night. I think this is the fourth or fifth reference that we're seeing in Stay with God across the parts with the dark night of the soul, right? A biblical concept. So here it is, it's back. Yeah, and then the beach. Remember the sands and the cruel wave curling beneath. That's the analogy he picked up in the beginning of this part with the honeyed kiss and Kali's tongue, which I still have to find out in the audios. Yes. Okay. Dropped last role state called heaven and hell. Pleasure and suffering intensified through lack of dampening flesh. Hell is hot or cold, or hot and cold, according to heat of desires and coldness of love. But world himself is fire which ever heats the crucible of forms, in which is melted the impressions of flesh and bone and brain, back to their origins of earth, fire, which after the clay is molded again as bricks for heart's next desire, bakes them to hardened form for soul's next enterprise. Himself brickmaker, fire, house builder, and householder. So all of those roles are that small self, smallest self himself. Brickmaker, fire, house builder, and householder. Wait a minute. The first word is himself with a big H. So the big self is also the small self, which is the brickmaker, which is the fire, which is the house builder, and the householder. Right? All of them are the same, and this is what we have learned. So he brings about what heaven and hell are. You remember the word that Baba uses again, a very rarely used English word for the heaven and hell state. He says vivification. It's vivified. The experiences are vivified. So, in that same way, the pleasure and suffering are intensified through the lack of dampening flesh. So, without the flesh, without the form, you experience the same experiences that you had with the body, and that is intensified, and that's heaven or hell. And then it is hell is hot or cold or hot and cold, according to heat of desire and coldness of love. So the absence of love makes it a hot experience. So he says coldness of love, right? To heat of desires and coldness of love. But world himself is fire, which ever heats the crucible of forms, in which is melted the impressions of flesh and bone and brain. Back to their origins of earth, fire, which after the clay is molded again as bricks for heart's next desire. Again, notice the poetic license here. It's the clay that is burning. But he says fire, which he also equates to the small self and the self itself. Fire, which after the clay is molded again as bricks for heart's next desire. So he's saying it's all the same. Whether it's clay or it's fire, that's getting molded as bricks for this heart's next desire and the next enterprise. Bakes them to harden form for soul's next enterprise. Powerful usage of words. Yeah, go ahead.
Here the fire can be taken as the I-ness or the ego also, which keeps you going through
everything
this.
alive. Good point.
Yeah.
Very good. Yes. Fire, which after the clay is molded as bricks for heart's next desire. So the separative existence egged on by this I-ness, which is the fire, makes the next set of bricks for the heart's next enterprise, the soul's next enterprise. Take a pause here, guys. Any reactions? Potter, Claymaker, John the Miller. How's Francis treating us this morning?
Ravi just sighing or smiling.
Yeah, he just unmuted and he's not sure what to say.
Just listening, enjoying.
Yeah.
Good.
Words.
I'm glad you are. Okay, let's continue. Heaven and hell, place of attempted scales balancing, from which, again coming and assuming another form to play another role upon the stage of world seeming, remembering nothing of the last part or endless list of performances. The new role in accordance with the shapes of ardencies and sloths, the qualities and direction of greeds and altruisms, the means of spending these impressions, and in the spending, taking up fresh debt to try and balance in dropped body state. The present role, a bark and growl, or a singing of sweet waters in sunlight over crystal sand according to intent and vehicle. Beautiful, beautiful lines. I mean, I'm reminded of Shakespeare, right? So I think spiritually, I don't know if Shakespeare was a dude or he was just, maybe Francis will talk about it later. Was he just another of the Renaissance of the artists that he's critical of, or he gives more credit for being godly and spiritual? I do not know. But I'm reminded in this para of Shakespeare's line, which is all the world's a stage, right? And then you come back with each form. And if you look at it, that's what he says here. Heaven and hell, place of attempted scales balancing. So that's where you sit intensively looking at your experiences again in the heaven and hell state, and from
So it is
which
place
you
of
come again.
attempted scale balancing. We don't
Yeah.
totally balance. Okay.
You just keep you keep attempting, and then after that you assume another form, again coming and assuming another form. To do what? To play another role upon the stage of world seeming. World seeming is a
Yes,
suggestion
that is
that the
a
world is
nice
not
way
real.
of not real. Yes.
Yeah, it's not real. It's a world which is only seeming. Remembering nothing of the last part or endless list of performances. So you've had many births and you don't remember those parts, and you don't remember anything from the previous performances. So you get back on stage and your mind is blank. You've already taken another part. The new role in accordance with the shape of ardencies and slots. I wanted
I
to
don't
check the
understand.
meaning of this word. Yeah. Ardencies. Okay, so ardent ardency.
Intense
So
devotion.
intense devotion, eagerness, zeal, and so on. So ardent devotee is the usage, right? So someone with a lot of
Intense feelings
devotion.
and passion. Okay.
Correct. So the new role is in accordance with the shapes of ardencies and sloths. So either you can be very ardent or you can be uncaring, unaffected. Your sloth is basically laziness, right? We'll check that. It's just laziness and sluggishness. It's the animal sloth. Meaning of sloth is disinclination to action or labor, indolence. How to, so that's what it is. That's the meaning we're after. So either you can be ardent, active, thinking, excited about devotion, or you can be unaffected and in to use a Vedantic expression, maybe it's tamas, right? On the one side you have sattva, and then you have the other side you have tamas. So
No,
I'm in
it is
sloth.
rajas and tamas.
Maybe more sattva and tamas, right? So ardency is
Very active, participative. That is rajas.
okay.
Sloth is not
Is the
interested.
extreme not interested. Yeah, tamas.
Yeah. I think Rajasic and Tamasic. Yeah.
Tamasic. Yeah. The qualities and directions of greeds and altruisms, the means of spending these impressions, and in the spending, taking up fresh debt. So, what we have learned, which is unwinding, adding to our samskaras, and spending. So, fresh debt is added to try and balance in dropped body state. Dropped body state is again an experience of heaven and hell. The present role, a bark and growl, or a singing of sweet waters in sunlight over crystal sand, according to intent and vehicle. I don't understand the last two lines. So we'll look forward to any interpretations of that.
According to
Obviously, the
intent
crystal
and vehicle.
sand, form and samskaras.
Intent is the say mental makeup of that particular say life.
Drop soul.
Vehicle is the actual gross body and the circumstances, probably according to intent and vehicle. So you may be having a intent, but your body may not suit for that intent. That can happen. So in sunlight or crystal sand, according to intent and vehicle, depending on both your gross structure and the intention or the I-ness or the say all the drive that you have,
Yeah.
you will live in this world.
Simple vehicle, simple could be man or a woman body.
Yeah.
That's a vehicle actually.
Yeah. Perfect. Agreed. So it could your present role could be a bark and growl like a dog, or a singing of sweet waters. So it's the examples of opposites, and in that, all that is determined by your intent and vehicle. Like you all said, it's sanskaras and form, which form that you're taken on. Okay, let's continue. Vehicle of gross body. Grossness is finiteness, seed of separation to which consciousness clings, while self longs for return. Consciousness clings to the earth like a child to its mother, while soul peeps out from behind her skirt to fresh adventure of play or from security of warmth. Kneels before winter window, dreaming of spring and sun, and vaguely voyaging. Consciousness clings to the earth, to its body, which is every moment passing away and returning, and says, "This is my home, myself," while soul, skies, dreams, journeys, and performances unhindered by body's weight. Beautiful visualization. The self longs for return, he says, and the gross, the identification with the body is what is being explained here, I believe. Vehicle of gross body is grossness is finiteness, and that happens to be the seed of separation. And sadly, consciousness clings to that, whereas the self, the the real self, longs for return. Consciousness clings to the earth like a child to its mother, while soul peeps out from behind her skirt. And what does the soul want? A fresh adventure of play, or from a security of warmth, either looks for winter window, dreaming of spring and sun, and vaguely voyaging. Consciousness clings to the earth, to its body, which is every moment passing away and returning. So the consciousness, sadly and wrongly, is clinging to the gross form, which actually is getting destroyed and then returning again and again. And says, "This is my home, myself," which soul, while soul skies dreams, journeys, and performances unhindered by body's weight. So here's some
Yeah,
thought-provoking.
I
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead,
I
Sanjay.
love the word vaguely voyaging.
Mhm.
We just just keep doing things and on and on and on and on
Yeah.
without a destination, just without putting our minds to it. Vaguely voyaging into the life. Actually, beautiful. Love this.
Just floating, just floating, just
Yeah, just floating.
unaware of the real values. Yeah,
Aimlessly. That aimless voyager. Actually, just
correct.
going on and on.
But is aimless voyage a virtue? Because there's no attachment.
It's not a virtue. It's not. No.
No, no.
It's not that. It is just remaining engaged with the world, but just aimlessly, do this, do that, do that. That kind of a thing. That life just goes on and on and on.
True, true.
So there
Agreed.
is no mission. It's progressing, but there is no aim or vision actually. Just or whatever is there is sort of our worldly targets. Raising the kids, marrying them off, on my own career, and this.
True.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
things. Vaguely voyaging, beautiful.
Beautiful. Vaguely
Also,
voyaging.
the last thing is the soul's journey or the uh, this is my home, myself. While soul skies dreams, journeys and performs unhindered by body's weight. Unhindered by body's weight. This grossness is never affects the soul.
Mhm.
So, whereas the vaguely voyaging is because of the body's weight. Uh, so, soul is
Okay,
never
so
weighed down by the grossness.
the distinction that we shouldn't miss in this stanza and the previous one is that there is a distinction made between consciousness and soul. So the
Yes,
two dimensions of viewing this, right? So the soul is different from the consciousness. Consciousness clings to form. Soul is free flow. Soul is unhindered. Soul is trying to make its journey unaffected, but it is should I say dragged down or limited by form. I mean, limited by consciousness. Is that a way to understand it?
no, I don't think because say the consciousness is the necessary vehicle for us to move ahead. So only thing
Mhm.
is the consciousness over the journey is always attached to the earth or the say gross body, and over the journey in involution alone, it distances itself from the grossness or the subtleness. So till that time, consciousness is always attached with the gross body. That is what he is referring to. So that is the sad part of it. So it doesn't join the soul's yearning to be free, yearning to be away from this grossness. So that contrast is brought here. And we need to understand that consciousness is not a bad thing. It is required. It is the one which drives us ahead in this spiritual path also. But initially, it is clinging to the I-ness, the grossness of the body, and all that. So that is the contrast here. And maybe he may be explaining further on these ideas, I think. Jai Baba.
Beautifully brought out. I totally agree, and I think it's well
Jay
explained.
Baba, I think my understanding is that there is something called Maha Chaitanya, super consciousness.
Hmm.
Now, that super consciousness, when it's covered by a residue of sanskaras, becomes the ordinary consciousness, which goes through all the different stages that we have seen from the mineral, plant, animal, and the human kingdom, where this consciousness has become full and complete, but still covered with the residue of sanskaras. So, if you have read God Speaks, you will know that when the consciousness of the soul attains the seventh plane, it attains the first stage of fana, real fana, which is called nirvana or manonash. And that is where the super consciousness is revealed, because it is now free of sanskaras. So, yes, definitely conscious. But also, if you look at God Speaks on the 10 states of God, infinite consciousness, infinite unconsciousness, this is all part of the divine dream. They don't exist. They are part of the false nothing as such, from a different angle. So I think there are different ways of looking at it. Yes, as Doc Mama said, consciousness is the vehicle which needs the human body, the human form to emancipate itself. So the body needs consciousness to survive, but consciousness needs the medium of the body to self-emancipate, to reach self-realization. Sheba.
Yes, thanks, Kama, for making it
Super.
clear.
Clearer. Yes. Thank you. Okay, let's continue. We have a few more minutes. Never coming to terms with it, never for long, undividedly enjoying residence in earth and forms promises, never holding beyond the duration of the glass, wine's taste, beyond the duration of the kiss, forgetfulness, beyond the night, release, moon of beauty, and then harsh sun of day and baked of frozen lands or narrow streets and fears. Resident in earth, house building, bridge building to beyond earth's boundaries, and the unseen bridge, and reviewing unskillfully experience of earth residents. Good against bad, bad against good. Equipoise, engrossment, and falling to birth to experience that engrossment. A lot being said here. A thick para. So let's, yeah, wanted to say
I
something?
think it's a bit difficult. I didn't catch the message here so clearly.
Yeah. So
Maybe
there's multiple messages. We'll read it again. And hey, where is that? Yeah, this is the one. Never coming to terms with it. So now he's continuing from where he left, which is we don't recognize the true nature of our relationship with the earth. Never coming to terms with it. Never for long. So even if you get it, you don't keep it for too long. Never for long. Undividedly enjoying residence in earth and forms. So what we do is we give our undivided attention and focus on the form and the grossness. Promises, never holding beyond the duration of the glass wine's taste. Sadly, that promise is never lasting beyond the taste of the glass. I mean, beyond the taste of finishing the glass of wine. So all of the experiences that we experience in the gross plane are experiences that are temporary and finite. So he gives examples. Beyond the duration of the kiss, forgetfulness. Beyond the night, release. Moon of beauty, and harsh sun of day, and baked of frozen lands or narrow streets and fears. Resident in earth, house building, bridge building to beyond earth's boundaries, and the unseen bridge, and reviewing unskillfully experience of earth residents. Good against bad, bad against good. Equipoise, engrossment, and falling to birth to experience that engrossment. So,
okay.
so all of this is the journey where you're constantly building the house, and maybe the unseen bridge, which is going beyond Earth's boundaries, is your connection with the master, maybe. And then what happens in the earth is reviewing unskillfully. We are not able to use our skills between good against bad, bad against good, and we don't have equipoise, which is we are engrossed, and we fall back to birth to experience that engrossment.
Okay.
Right? Maybe okay. I don't know. This is what I made
Promise
of it.
here, the catch point is forms, promises, never holding beyond. And if you stop, and there
The
are
duration,
so many examples.
examples. Correct.
Examples. Yes.
That's the key.
And
key
then
message.
resident
The key
in
message
earth
is
house building. Resident in earth house building, bridge building to beyond earth's boundaries, and unseen bridge. That is what is a bit difficult. And reviewing unskillfully the experience of the earth. So we are not learning anything here. So we are
exactly
always putting good against bad
making
or
the
bad
mistakes.
against good, and all your duality. You waddle around in duality. So you don't get to equipoise at all. Falling to birth to experience that engross. Once again, you go back to experience what you have stacked up as sanskaras. So this keeps on rolling like that. Probably this is how it is presented here.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree.
Uh,
So that goes on, and he continues till he meets the blissful, compassionate master and takes his stand in the flood. He goes back to the flood analogy. So he likes the beach, the flood, and the person standing in the flood. Maybe it's some mythical reference as well, because he's also linking it to Poseidon, the god of oceans, right? So we'll get to that. Maybe we'll have to listen to those audios carefully and know Greek mythology to understand this. Till he meets the blissful, compassionate master and takes his stand in the flood, in the currents of himself, and says in himself, enough has been far too much, and willingly and reverently and with joy high hoped bows before that one of wisdom and light, saying, teach me and help me. And he, the great one, who crossed and returned over the ocean of fire and waters, this Odysseus of voyaging, twice born after visiting the land of death without dying and so dead to life, reaching home where his treasure was and filling his ship with abundant gold and returning over the trackless sea to succor famished men. Says, so it's the avatar. So I'll finish what the avatar is saying and then we'll wrap up. Fear not, my child, my lover. There is a way through the sea of appearance in which you are swirled, a method of stopping the whirling wheel of rebirth, a means whereby the foundations of your present house may be shattered and no more built. For every knot tied, there is an untying. For every pain, a remedy. For every ignorance, a replacement with knowledge. Ancient is his knowledge. Sorry, ancient is this knowledge, so ancient that God, on his first arrival back into himself after his same journey you are making, knew it and brought it down to earth as first avatar. So ancient, yet ever wondrously new. Beautiful last line. To earth as first avatar, so ancient, yet ever wondrously new. So these two paras are talking about the master and how he comes and helps. So he meets the blissful, compassionate master and takes his stand in the flood, in the currents of himself, and says in himself, he says enough is enough and gets down to the right values, and willingly and reverently and with joy high hoped bows before that one of wisdom and light. So the one of wisdom and light is the master, saying, teach me and help me. So here is the first recognition of the master and surrender. Teach me and help me. And he, the great one, he is the great one who crossed and returned again over the ocean of fire. So again, fire is to mean all the journeys that we do. He comes back and waters this Odysseus of voyaging, twice born after visiting the land of death. And he doesn't die, and so dead to life, reaching home where his treasure was and filling his ship with abundant gold and returning over the trackless sea. Again, a frequently used expression by Francis, trackless seas. The sea is so confusing and without any guide. To succor famished men. And now he quotes the avatar. Fear not, my child, my lover. There is a way through the sea of appearance in which you're swirled. This is the sea, it's not even real, it's only appearance, and you're currently swirled in it. There is a method of stopping the whirling wheel of rebirth, a means whereby the foundations of your present house, your form, may be shattered, and it's not the house alone, it's the foundations of your house. And further, you may never build it anymore. That is, the foundations are broken, the form is lost, and you never have to come back. And then he gives an analogy: for every knot tied, there is an untying. For every pain, a remedy. For every ignorance, a replacement with knowledge. Ancient is this knowledge. So ancient that God, on his first arrival back into himself, after his same journey you are making, knew it and brought it down to earth as first avatar. So ancient, yet ever wondrously new. Fantastic,
Yes, sir.
right? So we stop at this point. So it's the end of our time. Any thoughts? Any
And
wishes?
reread the 2 stanzas next time first and then go ahead.
Sure, we will do that.
Not next week.
The week after next, yes. In fact, that's why I was scrolling to see if this part ends. The part goes on for quite some time. Part ends here.
Okay.
Yeah, it ends here. Yeah. So I was trying to also see if we can finish this part today. So in the first 2 parts, it's just the divine theme. The third part is what we experience in reincarnation and involution, and specifically the role of the master is just introduced. So let's see what happens further in the end of this part and beyond. Okay, so any quick comments, any thoughts before we wrap up?
No program for next week. No class.
Yeah, so given that you are not coming, Baba, you want to run the program on Saturday, that's fine.
No. Run to whom? That is the question.
No. Yeah, so I'll check with the Dars as well. So if needed, we'll do Saturday, or we'll directly pick it up on 16th.
Okay.
On 16th and 17th, that is the Saturday after next. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Jai Baba. Much
Jai
love to
Baba.
all of you.
Jai Baba.
And
Thank you.
see you, Sanjay, next weekend.
Jai Baba. I'm
Jai
not
Baba.
sure. I have not yet got the reservation, but let's see.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah,
You mean in MPI?
Yeah. Yes, I've not got it. It's all full.
Oh, really? So I was
Yeah,
on
yes.
time. Okay, but you're traveling with Babi, right?
Yeah, that was the plan. Even my daughter, I requested for all 3, but
so
I have not yet got.
You're going to get 1 cancellation. So if you know your waiting list number, at least, because mamas, I have to write to them to cancel. So
I'll write to them by name.
Yeah. Sure.
That means they can give it to me.
Yes,
yeah.
Please.
So I can go alone, maybe. Yeah. Okay, let's see.
Sure.
Yeah. Jai Baba.
And in my cancellation also, I'll refer to that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I'll copy
you. Jai Baba. Jai Baba. Okay. Jai Baba. Thank you.